This PowerPoint is about narrative text. It was created by Heidi Miller for use in this class. Narrative text is the literacy term for fiction. Narrative texts are typically easier to read and comprehend than expository text, which we sometimes call informational or nonfiction, because the story structure is similar throughout narrative texts. The vocabulary is usually more familiar Tier 1 and Tier 2 words. The background knowledge needed for comprehension of narrative text is usually more similar and common to their life experiences than expository text. The Common Core standards refer to fiction as literature. There are 6 genres in narrative text. Introduce students to each of the genres since people find some types more appealing than others. Discovering enjoyment for particular genres can lead to increased reading, which stimulates vocabulary growth, fluency, and comprehension. Beth Newingham created posters to advertise the 6 genres. They are free to download at the following site. Each poster has a student-friendly definition as well as images of books in that genre that are written at a variety of levels. The first genre is fantasy. It's a story that includes elements that are impossible, such as talking animals or magical powers. The next genre is realistic fiction. It is a story using made-up characters, but the story could happen in real life. The next is mystery. They are suspenseful stories about a puzzling event that's not solved until the end of the story. Students are taught to infer, looking for clues provided by the author and the illustrator. The next genre is historical fiction. It's a fictional story that takes place in a particular time period in the past. Often the setting is real, but the characters are made up from the author's imagination. Traditional literature is the next genre. These are stories that are passed down from generation to generation. They include folk tales, legends, fables, and myths from different cultures. Science fiction is a type of fantasy that uses science and technology like robots and time machines. At the primary level, there are 7 elements in narratives. Introducing the basic ones first, and then add the more specific elements as readers develop. Learning the story elements aids in comprehension of the story because the elements are anticipated. The knowledge of these elements also aids when students begin writing their own stories. They can think through and outline the elements of their story before they begin to write. TeacherTube.com and YouTube.com have many songs and other materials that you can use to teach and practice the story elements. TeacherTube is free, but you must create an account. You can find catchy, repetitive songs or stories that serve as a semantic tool to imprint the story elements on the brain. Can be great again as a brain break or a transition activity. The 7 elements in narrative text are setting, characters, problem or conflict, plot, solution, point of view, and theme. These will be introduced in detail in the following slides. The first one is characters. Often there is a main character or 2 and supporting characters. The setting is when and where the story takes place. Problem or conflict is usually introduced early on. It can be an internal problem like feelings about themselves, or it might be an external problem that the character experiences, somebody teasing them, for example. Plot is the next story element. In the text structure, it's the rise and the fall of action, things that are happening to the characters. Next is the solution of the problem, also called the resolution. The problem or conflict is solved, and the end of the story comes soon after that. Point of view can be first or third person. This will be explained on the next slide. And then finally, theme, the message the author is trying to send through the story, sometimes like the moral of the story. If a story is written from first person, it's when the main character is telling the story. You'll see pronouns like I and me used throughout the story. Third person is when a narrator tells the story. You'll see the pronouns he or she and him and her used. The next 5 slides give very brief descriptions about setting and character. When students are initially introduced to these pieces in kindergarten and first grade, they're done in an age-appropriate way with examples from books that are being used in read-alouds and guided reading books. More advanced information is shared as they have more experience. Take a few seconds to read through each of these next slides. The following slides show images of story structure of how the plot unfolds. It's sometimes called a plot diagram. Children as young as kindergarten can learn the basic elements and identify them in stories that are read to them and then in stories that they read. The parts of a plot are exposition, rising action, the climax, falling action, and finally the resolution. Read through the brief descriptions on these next slides. Often the author includes themes. There may be a message about life, what the deeper meaning is to the story, or what the main character learns through the conflict. One of the first ways to talk about that main idea of a story is to have a discussion with the students. This will let you know if they're comprehending what the piece is really about before then going into details in the story. This is often referred to as the VIP, or the very important part. Prompt students with the following phrases. What's the VIP? What's this story really about? Tell me about this story in 2 to 3 sentences. Then you can add additional elements as appropriate for the development of the student. When you begin teaching narrative structure, you will teach only part of the diagram. First, not all narratives follow the diagram, so choose stories that fit that structure when you're modeling and teaching this structure. Introduce the basic elements first, like character, setting, and major events in the story. Ask the students to tell you what happened in the story. The most basic steps are to have them tell what happened at the beginning of the story, the middle of the story, and the end of the story. Then you can go back and have them add extra details. Orally retelling a story is a next step in scaffolding narrative structure. It's effective to do this with small groups or with whole classes after you've read a story aloud. Using a big book helps them to see as well as remember the details in the book. As students advance, introduce the 5-finger retell, which gives them a visual kinesthetic way to organize a story. A visual will be on the next slide. Do this orally a lot with young children. As they improve on their ability to read and tell the story, they can then write on a graphic organizer. Have the students hold up one hand. When they wiggle the thumb, that's the characters, so have them name any characters in the story. Next is the index finger. This is the setting. Where does the story take place? The middle finger, what happened at the beginning of the story? This is the rising action on the story structure diagram. Ring finger, middle of the story. This is the climax, kind of when it all comes to a head. And then the little finger is the end of the story, the falling action or the resolution. Take a minute and look at the 5-finger retell on the next page. Graphic organizers work well for more advanced students, depending on their abilities. It is a next step after having many opportunities to orally retell stories in large groups and with partners. Organizers help students organize and understand the structure, monitor for comprehension, retell the very important part of the story, reflect on what they read, and make story connections. This is one image of how to draw the plot diagram. You can teach students to use this format when they're reading a narrative or to plan a story when they're learning to write a story. You can make your own sheets or you can find them online. Begin teaching comprehension strategies before students can read as you read stories aloud so that they become cognizant of the importance of getting meaning from what we read from the very beginning. The final slide in this PowerPoint are some references that you can follow to learn more about it.